When Chief Daniel Miller found his 10-year-old daughter, Emma, a heart patient, chained to their own porch by the HOA president, Karen, his world stopped. What Karen didn't know was that Daniel wasn't just a neighbor. He was the police chief of the entire town. What started as cruel discipline turned into a full-blown criminal investigation that would shake the whole neighborhood. If you believe no one is above the law, not even an HOA president, stay till the end of this story. Because justice isn't polite, it kicks the door in. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to HOA Tale Time for more real-life inspired stories where truth fights back. My name's Daniel Walker. Around here, people know me as the police chief of Maple Ridge. A quiet town with more pine trees than problems, or so I thought. We moved here 3 years ago for my daughter, Emma. She's 14 now, born with a heart condition that's made her life a string of surgeries, checkups, and hospital hallways. She's my reason for everything, the reason I get up early, the reason I fight for fairness, and the reason I try to believe people are still good at heart. The day it happened started like any other Saturday morning. The air was warm, the kind that makes you want to sit outside and sip coffee while the world wakes up slow. Emma loved mornings like that. She'd sit on the porch with her sketchbook, drawing birds or flowers, her oxygen tank humming softly beside her chair. She said it made her feel normal, like any other kid just enjoying the sun. But normal didn't last long in this neighborhood. Not with Karen Middleton running the HOA. Karen was the self-appointed queen of Maple Ridge Estates. The kind of woman who walked around with a clipboard, like it was a weapon and thought. Every family was a personal project she needed to fix. She'd find people for leaving their trash cans out 10 minutes too long, for parking slightly crooked, even for hanging holiday lights before Thanksgiving. She said rules kept things beautiful. I always thought rules were supposed to keep people safe. That morning I left early for the station. There was a town event that needed security planning, so I figured I'd be gone an hour or two. Emma waved from the porch as I pulled out of the driveway. Her smile looked better than it had in weeks. Her cheeks had color again, and she seemed excited about the little garden she was growing beside her chair. She wanted to plant lavender next. When I got back around 9, the street was quiet. Too quiet. I parked the cruiser and started walking up to the house. That's when I saw it, and my heart nearly stopped. Emma was sitting on the porch, but her chair had been pushed aside. A metal chain wrapped around her wrist, the other end padlocked to the porch railing. Her oxygen tube was twisted, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Dad!" she cried the moment she saw me. She said I wasn't allowed to sit here alone. I dropped everything and ran to her. My hands were shaking as I tried to free the chain, but it was locked tight. The sound of it clinking against the wood made something boil inside me I didn't know I was capable of feeling. Then I heard the voice, cold, sharp, entitled. She needed to learn the rules. "Daniel," Karen said, standing at the edge of our yard with her clipboard in hand. She wasn't even hiding the satisfaction in her tone. "The HOA bylaws state that all common property—" I cut her off before she could finish. "This isn't common property. This is my home, and that's my daughter." She crossed her arms, completely unfazed. "You haven't paid your last maintenance fee." "Until that's settled, the association retains rights to shared structures, including porches. She's been sitting out here unsupervised for hours. I told her to go inside, but she refused. So I secured the area for her safety." "Secured the area?" I repeated, hardly believing what I was hearing. My daughter's pulse monitor beeped weakly against her wrist. She was trembling. Karen sighed, rolling her eyes like I was overreacting. "You really shouldn't let your emotions get in the way of community standards." "Chief Walker." The way she said my name, like a jab, made my blood run cold. I looked back at Emma, her breathing shallow, her lips starting to quiver from fear. I could see where the metal chain had rubbed her skin raw. That was it. That was the moment something inside me broke. Quietly, but completely. "Karen," I said, my voice calm but heavy. "Unlock it. Now." She hesitated, clearly unsure of how far she could push me. "I'll remove it once you settle your fees." "Rules are rules." I stepped closer. "You don't understand," I said quietly. "You crossed a line you can't uncross." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my badge, and held it up to her face. "You just illegally restrained a minor." "That's not a rule violation. That's a felony." Her eyes widened for a second, but she tried to recover with a smirk. You can't use your position for personal matters, Chief. This is between homeowner and HOA. I ignored her words and focused on my daughter. I pulled a multi-tool from my belt and snapped the small lock open. The chain fell away with a metallic thud. I lifted Emma into my arms and she clung to me, sobbing softly. Her skin was ice cold, her pulse fluttering weakly under my thumb. Neighbors had started to peek out from behind their curtains. They saw the scene, Karen frozen in place, me cradling my trembling daughter. But no one said a word. Not yet. I carried Emma inside, set her gently on the couch, and called for the paramedics. My hands were still shaking as I explained what happened over the phone. When I glanced outside again, Karen was gone. That was the day everything changed. Up until that moment, I thought being police chief meant protecting the town from strangers, burglars, drunks, maybe the occasional domestic dispute. I never imagined the real danger would come from someone pretending to be a neighbor. But I learned something that day. Evil doesn't always come wearing a mask or carrying a gun. Sometimes it shows up with a clipboard, a fake smile, and a homeowner's rule book. And I promised myself, and my daughter, that this time, justice wouldn't just knock. It would kick the door in. I didn't yell. I didn't storm out the door or threaten anyone. I'd been a cop too long to let anger drive me. But inside, something was burning slow and steady, like a fuse waiting to reach the dynamite. After Emma was taken to the hospital for observation, I sat in that quiet house staring at the chain she'd been locked with. It was heavy, cold, and had her dried tears on it. I kept turning it in my hands, wondering how anyone could look at a child, my child, and think that chaining her was reasonable. When I finally stepped outside, Karen was waiting by her car at the end of the driveway, arms crossed like she was the victim. "You've blown this way out of proportion," she said. "You know, for a lawman, you sure don't respect authority when it's not wearing a badge." I walked down the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. "You chained a 14-year-old girl," I said quietly. "There's no authority on earth that justifies that." She rolled her eyes. "Your daughter's been a problem since the day you moved in. That ramp you built? Never approved. Those medical supplies on your porch? Violation of visual standards. Everyone else has to follow the rules, Daniel. Why should you be any different?" Her tone was casual, like she was reciting grocery prices. I stared at her, trying to decide if she actually believed the garbage coming out of her mouth. "You didn't enforce a rule," I said. "You broke the law." "Don't threaten me," she snapped, stepping closer. "You think that badge makes you untouchable?" "It doesn't. You're just another homeowner under the association. You can't use your job to intimidate me." I took a breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm not intimidating you, Karen. I'm telling you the truth. What you did is a criminal act, unlawful restraint and endangerment of a minor. You didn't secure my daughter. You chained her like an animal." For a moment, she said nothing. Then she smirked, that same smug curve of her lips that had probably silenced every neighbor who ever tried to stand up to her. "Go ahead," she said. "Call the cops. Let's see how that looks when the police chief calls in a domestic dispute on his own HOA president." That was the moment she made her biggest mistake. She thought she still held power over me, that I'd be too afraid of the optics, too cautious about my position. But this wasn't about a title anymore. It was about right and wrong. I pulled my badge from my pocket and held it up just enough for her to see. "You're right," I said. "Let's see how it looks." She blinked, realizing too late that she'd been talking to the one man who didn't need to call anyone. I could see the color drain from her face as it finally sank in. She wasn't dealing with just another neighbor. She was standing in front of the law itself. "I suggest you get a lawyer," I said, stepping back. "Because from where I stand, this looks a lot like kidnapping." She started to stammer, her bravado cracking. "Daniel, let's not do something we'll both regret." "You know I didn't mean—" "You meant to control," I said sharply. "You just didn't expect consequences." Within minutes, I radioed dispatch and requested a unit. 2 deputies arrived in under 10. They knew Emma. They'd been to her birthday last year. The moment they saw the chain and the marks on her wrist, their faces went pale. One of them, Deputy Ruiz, looked at me and said quietly, "Chief, we treating this as an assault?" "Yes," I said, "and make sure she's processed by the book." Karen's composure finally broke. "You can't do this," she shouted as Ruiz began reading her rights. "I'm on the HOA board. You'll lose your job for this." But even as she yelled, she knew it was over. The neighborhood had started to gather, people watching from porches, phones in hand, whispering to one another. The woman who had spent years intimidating everyone was finally realizing what it felt like to stand on the other side of fear. As they escorted her to the cruiser, she looked back at me, eyes wide and wild. "You're making a mistake," she hissed. "You think you can turn this community against me? You'll regret this." I didn't answer. I just watched as the taillights faded down the street. For the first time in months, the neighborhood was quiet, not out of fear, but out of shock. People who had been too afraid to speak suddenly realized that the monster at their door could be stopped. When I went back inside, the chain was still lying on the porch, glinting faintly in the morning light. I picked it up, feeling the weight again. But this time, it didn't feel like shame. It felt like evidence, proof that power without empathy is just cruelty in disguise. Later, when I sat beside Emma's hospital bed, she reached out her hand. "Did you arrest her, Dad?" she asked softly. "I did," I said. "And not because I'm the police chief, because I'm your dad. And no one chains my little girl and walks away from it." She smiled weakly, and for the first time since it happened, I saw a bit of peace in her eyes. I realized then that justice isn't always about laws or titles. Sometimes it's about standing up when everyone else is too afraid to. That night I made a promise to myself, and to every family in Maple Ridge. This wasn't going to end with an arrest. It was going to end with a reckoning. By morning, the story had already started spreading across Maple Ridge. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now stood in their driveways, whispering in small, nervous circles. It was as if someone had finally cracked the shell of fear that Karen had built around this community. For years, she ruled with fines, threats, and letters that made people feel powerless. But after what she did to Emma, no one could pretend she was just strict anymore. Everyone had seen too much. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed by Emma's side in the hospital, listening to the steady rhythm of her heart monitor. It was fragile like her, but steady. Every beep reminded me how close she'd come to another crisis because someone decided that power mattered more than humanity. She finally drifted off around 4 a.m., and I went home to change. That's when I saw the messages. Dozens of them. "Chief, we're so sorry." She fined us $200 for leaving a tricycle in the yard. She told my husband to move his truck during a thunderstorm. She screamed at my daughter for chalk. Drawings on the sidewalk. Story after story, each one worse than the last. People who had been too afraid to speak were finally finding their voices. By noon, my driveway looked like a town meeting. Neighbors stood there holding coffee mugs, clutching papers, old violation letters, photos, and emails from Karen. Some had tears in their eyes. Martha, an older widow from 3 houses down, stepped forward first. "Daniel, I've wanted to talk to you for years," she said quietly. But she told us the HOA had the power to raise our property taxes or take legal action if we complained. I didn't know any better. I thought she was the law. I shook my head. "She wasn't the law, Martha. She just wanted you to believe she was." Another man, Tom, spoke up. "She threatened to fine me $500 because my mother's nurse parked on the street. I paid it because I didn't want trouble." One by one, they told their stories about threats, humiliation, and the constant fear of retaliation. Listening to them, I realized this wasn't just about Karen's cruelty. It was about a community that had forgotten how to stand together. Fear had turned neighbors into strangers. "We can't just let this slide," Martha said, her voice shaking but firm. "We need to take back our HOA." For a moment, everyone looked at me, expecting me to fix it all. I wasn't used to seeing fear in their eyes mixed with hope. I took a deep breath and said, "Then we do this by the book. No shouting matches, no chaos. We do it legally, transparently, and together." That afternoon, we gathered in the community center, the same place where Karen had held her intimidating meetings for years. The walls still had her neatly framed code of conduct posters, each one more absurd than the next. I remember thinking how something meant to build unity had turned into a weapon. I stood at the front of the room, my uniform still on, not because I wanted authority, but because I wanted them to know they had protection now. "Karen may be in custody," I began, "but her behavior went unchecked because too many people were afraid to speak. That stops today. This isn't about revenge. It's about rebuilding what she broke." The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a man from the back said, "How do we even start?" "First," I said, "we hold a vote to remove her and any board members who supported her. Then we open every record, every fine, every policy she pushed through. We'll expose what she did, publicly. You have rights. You just forgot you did. For the first time I saw nods around the room instead of downcast eyes. Hope, quiet but real, began to ripple through the crowd. The vote happened right there. Every hand went up, unanimous. Karen Middleton was officially removed as HOA president. When the vote was over, there was a silence that didn't feel heavy anymore. It felt cleansing, like the air after a storm. Some people cried, others hugged. One woman whispered, "We finally did it." As I stood there watching them, I realized something important. This wasn't about one person being punished. It was about an entire neighborhood remembering its power. After the meeting, I walked outside into the golden light of the late afternoon. Kids were riding bikes again. A man across the street put up a small flag in his yard without fear of a violation notice. It was small, but it was freedom. I checked my phone and saw a text from the hospital. Emma's stable. "She's asking for you." I smiled for the first time in days. Justice had begun. Not in a courtroom, but in the hearts of people who finally refused to be silent. As I locked the doors of the community center behind me, I thought about everything that had happened. For years, one person's cruelty had divided us. But in one day of truth, we'd found each other again. That night, as I sat by Emma's bed, she looked up at me and asked, "Did they listen, Dad?" I brushed her hair from her forehead and said softly, "They did, sweetheart." "They finally listened," she smiled weakly. Then maybe something good came out of it. And maybe she was right. Maybe sometimes tragedy is the only thing powerful enough to break chains we can't see, the invisible ones made of fear and silence. That night, the neighborhood of Maple Ridge stopped being just houses with fences. It became a community again. And for the first time in a long while, I believed things could really change. The morning the arrest warrant was signed, the air felt different. It was crisp and heavy, like the world knew something big was about to happen. I stood in my office staring at the paper. The official order to arrest Karen Middleton for unlawful restraint, child endangerment, and harassment. 3 charges, each one carrying years in prison. But what weighed most on me wasn't the ink on that page. It was everything it represented. It wasn't just about Emma anymore. It was about every person she had bullied into silence. Every elderly neighbor who paid fake fines just to keep her off their doorstep. Every parent who taught their kid not to draw chalk art because the lady with the clipboard might yell. When I stepped out of the station, my deputies were already waiting by the cruiser. They knew what we were doing. No one said much, but the tension in their faces said enough. They'd seen her terrorize this community for years. They'd seen how people flinched at her name. This wasn't just another arrest. It was justice, with a long overdue echo. We drove to Maple Ridge under the pale morning light. The streets were quiet, blinds twitching as we passed. Word had spread fast. Everyone knew what was coming, but no one dared to step outside yet. When we turned onto Karen's street, she was already outside, watering her manicured lawn as if nothing had happened. She looked up, saw the patrol cars, and smirked. That same smirk I'd seen the day she chained my daughter. "Well," she said, voice sharp as ever, "this is quite the show. What's the occasion?" I walked up to her calmly, warrant in hand. "Karen Middleton, you're under arrest for unlawful restraint, endangerment of a minor, and harassment." She laughed, an ugly, forced laugh. "You're joking." "Daniel, come on." "You can't be serious. This is ridiculous." "Ma'am," I said firmly, "place your hands behind your back." Her face twisted, disbelief turning into anger. "You can't do this." I was enforcing community policy. I was protecting the standards that keep this neighborhood safe and beautiful. I stepped closer. "You don't get to hide behind rules to justify cruelty. You didn't protect anyone. You hurt a child." Neighbors began peeking from their porches, their curiosity outweighing their fear. Some held their phones up quietly, recording. Karen noticed and panicked. "Turn those off," she shouted. "This is illegal. I'm your president. You can't record this." But they didn't stop. For once, she wasn't the loudest voice in the neighborhood. Deputy Ruiz gently took her wrists and cuffed her. "Karen Middleton, you have the right to remain silent," he began, reading her rights. She sputtered, shaking her head, muttering that this was a mistake, that she'd sue everyone. But no one came to defend her. Not a single neighbor spoke up. The silence that followed was powerful, not out of fear, but because people were done giving her power. When the car door closed and the latch clicked, something in the air shifted. The reign of fear was over. I turned around and saw Martha standing on her porch, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "For all of us," I nodded. No one should ever be afraid to live in their own home. Later that day, I drove straight to the hospital. Emma was sitting up, her coloring better, a book open in her lap. When she saw me walk in, her eyes lit up. "You did it, didn't you?" she asked softly. I sat beside her, exhaling for what felt like the first time in days. "Yes, sweetheart. She's in custody." Emma smiled, weak but proud. "Does that mean it's over?" "Almost," I said. "Justice takes time, but we're getting there." She reached for my hand and squeezed. "You didn't lose your kindness, Dad. That's why you win." Her words hit deeper than she knew. Because the truth is, I almost did lose it. The anger, the helplessness, it could have easily turned me into someone like Karen. But I remembered who I was, who Emma needed me to be. When I left the hospital that evening, the neighborhood was alive again. Kids played catch on the lawns. Someone was grilling. Music drifted faintly through the air. It felt like the town was exhaling, finally free. At the station, I finished my report. Everything had to be documented. Every photo, every witness, every statement. But before I signed off, I looked at the chain resting in an evidence bag on my desk. That cold piece of metal that once symbolized control now stood for something else. Proof that even the smallest act of cruelty can ignite the biggest reckoning. By sunset, the local news had picked up the story. HOA president arrested for abuse of power. The words scrolled across the bottom of the screen, and for a moment, I just watched in silence. Not because I wanted credit, but because I wanted people to see what happens when someone finally stands up. That night, when I drove home, the neighbors waved. Not out of obligation, but out of gratitude. Porch lights glowed like small beacons of peace. And as I parked in my driveway, I realized that justice doesn't always roar into town with sirens. Sometimes it arrives quietly, like the steady heartbeat of a community finally waking up from fear. And for the first time in a long time, Maple Ridge slept peacefully, knowing that the law hadn't just knocked. It had kicked the door in. The following morning felt different. The air was still, almost reverent, as if the whole town was waiting for something to shift. Karen's house sat across the street, blinds drawn tight, the same place she'd once stood proudly, clipboard in hand, dictating how tall everyone's mailbox could be. But that morning, her driveway was empty, her porch deserted. For the first time since we'd moved into Willow Bend, it was silent. That silence carried weight, not of fear, but of consequence. Because last night, the badge I'd worn for 22 years wasn't just a symbol of duty. It became a weapon of justice. And this morning, the echoes of that justice were rippling through every corner of this neighborhood. The night before, when I watched my daughter being carried into the ambulance, her tiny hand still bruised from where the chain had cut, something inside me cracked open. I'd seen the worst humanity could offer, in gang busts, domestic disputes, and crime scenes that haunted me. But seeing my little girl treated like an animal on our own porch, that was different. That was personal. I didn't need a warrant to act, not this time. I had evidence, witnesses, and the moral authority to protect not just my child, but every family in this community who'd ever been bullied by an HOA gone mad. Karen didn't expect a knock at her door that night, and certainly not from half the police department. I stood behind my officers as she opened the door, robe on, feigning confusion. "Chief Miller, what's this about?" she asked, voice trembling but her eyes still sharp with entitlement. I didn't answer right away. I let the silence fill. The air let her see the reflection of the flashing lights in her window. The same lights she'd called on so many of her neighbors for ridiculous violations. Finally I spoke. "Karen Blake, you're under arrest for child endangerment, unlawful restraint, and reckless conduct." Her mouth fell open. "You can't be serious. It was just a disciplinary—" "Save it," I cut her off. "You crossed a line you can't talk your way out of." The community gathered outside as she was handcuffed and led down her driveway, her perfect image unraveling under the blue and red glare. Phones recorded, whispers spread, and for once, no one felt sorry for her. This wasn't gossip, It was reckoning. Some neighbors looked away. Others nodded in quiet solidarity. They knew the kind of fear she'd ruled with. Fines for parking too long, letters about kids playing too loudly, threats to single parents for unkept lawns. But this time, the mask had fallen. And behind it was cruelty that couldn't be excused by just following the rules. In the weeks that followed, Karen's trial became the town's turning point. The footage from our porch camera, the one she hadn't known existed, showed everything. Her dragging my daughter out, shouting about community standards, chaining her to the post while my wife screamed for her to stop. The jury didn't need long. The verdict came swift and loud, guilty on all counts. When the gavel hit the desk, it didn't just seal Karen's fate. It freed the whole neighborhood from years of fear. But justice wasn't just about her punishment. It was about rebuilding what had been broken. Trust, safety, decency. After Karen's conviction, I worked with city officials to dissolve the HOA board entirely. What replaced it wasn't about control or punishment. It was about care. We formed a neighborhood committee. Volunteers, parents, teachers, veterans. People who actually wanted to serve, not rule. My daughter, still healing, became something of a local hero. Her strength gave others courage to speak up about their own experiences, their own scars. One afternoon, months later, she stood on that same porch where she'd been chained and said softly, "Dad, I'm not scared of this place anymore." Her voice cracked, but there was light in it. I hugged her, not as a police chief, not as someone who'd delivered justice, but as a father who'd nearly lost what mattered most. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. The lesson in all of it wasn't about power or revenge. It was about responsibility. Titles, uniforms, badges. They only mean something when you use them to protect, not dominate. Karen used her position to control others. I used mine to stop her, and in that difference, our town found its soul again. As I look out over Willow Bend now, I see more than manicured lawns and freshly painted fences. I see people talking again, laughing again. The same porch that once held my daughter in chains now holds flower pots and wind chimes, and when the wind blows through them, it sounds like freedom. Justice doesn't always come with a gavel or a headline. Sometimes it comes quietly, through the courage to stand up, the love to protect, and the will to rebuild. That's what we did here. And that's what I'll keep doing, because justice doesn't knock, it kicks the door in.